Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever in the world you are. Yes, the Zimbabwe 2023 elections have kicked off. Yesterday, 21st of June, 2023, was nomination day. And 11 of presidential candidates have since successfully submitted their nomination papers. We just listened to a list of the candidates as being announced so far. They could increase. Some of them are still struggling to find to pay up their nomination fees. So the list is not finalized yet. But so far, 11 have been cleared. Just listen to their names.
That will be contesting Zimbabwe's presidency on August the 23rd, 2023. Ambassador, if I may ask you to repeat those names again, if you do not mind.
Okay. For ZANU-PF, His Excellency President Emmerson Mnangagwa. For Free Zim Congress, Mr. Busha Joseph Makamba. For Triple C, Mr. Chamisa Nelson. For ZCPD, Mr. Chikohora Trust Tapiwa. For ZIPP, Mr. Kasia Muru Blessing. Standing as an independent, Mr. Kasukuwere Sevia. For NCA, Mr. Maduku Lovemore. For NPC, Mr. Mbaiwa Wilbert Archibald. For UANC, Mr. Mzorewa Gwinyai Henry. For MDC, Mr. Monzora Douglas Togarasei. And last but not least, Mr. Wilson Harry Peter for DOP.
There we have it. That's their official list so far, anyway, of the candidates who are contesting these Zimbabwe presidential elections. What is interesting here is the 2018 elections were rigged. Most of the people who observed them, including the main opposition and some of the 23 candidates who participated last time, agreed that the elections were not free, fair, and credible. The European Union had a high-powered observer mission composed of 246 individuals who observed those elections. And they produced detailed reports. And their conclusion was that Zimbabwean elections were not to international standards. They came up with 23 reform recommendations. None of those 23 recommendations have seen the light of day. So if we agree that the 2018 elections were not free, fair, and credible, not even one token reform has been implemented, I think it follows that the 2023 elections will also be rigged. And yet here we are. The enthusiasm with which our opposition friends in the opposition camp are participating in these elections is leaving any observer speechless. Do they not know that the elections were rigged? Of course they do. Most of these people who are standing for these elections are well-informed people. They know the elections were rigged. They know the process was flawed, but they still want to stand. Why? Well, greed. As simple as that. The 2018 elections, 23, there were as much as 23 presidential candidates. And Mnangagwa won those elections. And to entice, to make sure that in future more of these presidential candidates participate, he created this animal called POLAD, political actors forum, which was basically the losing presidential candidates, a body for the losing presidential candidates. But to be a member of POLAD, you had to publicly admit that the elections were free, fair, and credible, and that Mnangagwa was the legitimately elected president. And a few of them, well, a number of them actually admitted that, and they became members of POLAD. And they've since been getting a lot of benefits from being members of POLAD, including a twin cab truck worth US $60,000. And it is believed that they were eligible to get diplomatic passports. And they've been asked to do various activities at government expense, for which they were well rewarded. And so POLAD has become a very attractive option for opposition leaders. And I think maybe it was because, with that in mind, that the government decided they were going to have nomination fees to be paid to contest these elections. And so they are charging a staggering $20,000 as a nomination fee for a presidential candidate. Many of the individuals who would have otherwise participated in these elections could not afford to raise that. You've got to remember that in Zimbabwe, a teacher and a nurse, who are probably the lucky ones to be employed, get as much as little as US $100 per month. So 20,000 US dollars nomination fees. That's the equivalent of 2 years' salary for a nurse, where you're putting the money to one side, or don't even touch it. 2 years' salary. It is, of course, prohibitive. And so most of the people who would have otherwise contested these elections as a presidential candidate were forced to drop out. They couldn't raise that kind of money. So in the end, about 11 have managed to do so. And they've been officially confirmed as official candidates. What is interesting here is even those who participate, like Nelson Chamisa, who participated last time, they cannot complain afterwards that the elections were rigged. Once you've participated, knowing the process is flawed, and it is flawed. I mean, one of the most obvious things about these elections is, for instance, that ZEC has once again failed to produce a verified voters roll. How can you have meaningful, free, fair, and credible elections without a verified voters roll? But we don't have one. ZEC has failed to produce a verified voters roll once again. And these individuals are participating in these elections regardless. What is interesting, what should be remembered here, is that once you have participated in these elections, knowing fully well the process is flawed, you cannot complain afterwards that the elections were rigged. You knew the elections were being rigged. You were warned that the elections are flawed, and you refused to accept it. You refused to do anything about it. And so it is imperative, it is important that these people understand the implications of participating in these elections. And I think they do. What we are failing, what these people fully appreciate is that, know and appreciate is that they are participating out of greed. And they are participating, they are giving ZANU-PF legitimacy. And those who go even one step further and publicly endorse Mnangagwa as the winner, publicly announced that the elections were free, fair, and credible. This is what is making it so difficult for Zimbabwe to get out of this mess. Because even if organizations like the European Union say these elections are not free, fair, and credible, they've got to look at what the Zimbabweans themselves are doing. If the Zimbabweans themselves are participating in these flawed elections, regardless, it is very difficult for an outsider to say, no, these elections are flawed. Yeah, but that's what we want. And Mnangagwa knows that, and he's playing on that. He is exploiting that. And the announcement that there are 11 presidential candidates, he's going to wave that like a banner. How can you say Zimbabweans elections are not free, fair, and credible? Look at how many people are contesting for in the presidential race. And to try to say to him, yeah, but the elections are not free, fair, and credible. You don't have a verified voters roll. You turn around and say, yeah, all my other 10 presidential candidate colleagues there, they knew that. And to say to him, ZANU-PF is frog marching the rule of voters. You again turn around and say all 10 of them knew that well in advance. That was happening. And they still decided they wanted to participate. So the problem we have now is a situation where the opposition is participating in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, knowing fully well that ZANU-PF is denying the people the fundamental right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. They are participating for the sake of greed. In fact, they sell out as when it comes to reforms. The real big critical moment came during the 2008 to 2013 GNU, when ZANU-PF and MDC were in the government of national unity. It was expected of MDC, Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends, to implement the democratic reforms. They had 5 years to do so. They failed to implement even one token democratic reform. The GNU was the golden opportunity because SADC, who were behind the government of the global political agreement of 2008, which gave birth to the GNU itself, were the guarantor of that agreement. And per se had a say throughout the GNU. And when they realized that no meaningful reforms had been implemented before the 2013 elections, SADC leaders actually proposed that the 2013 elections should be postponed to allow the reforms to be implemented. And they told Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends that they were going to lose the elections if they participate without reforms. Sadly, Morgan Tsvangirai and his friends ignored the warning, and they participated, and of course ZANU-PF won those elections. And now, ever since, we have been caught in this vicious cycle where the opposition are participating purely out of greed. And as long as they participate, they give ZANU-PF legitimacy. How are we going to break this mold? I think we can break this mold by the people themselves realizing that the opposition, CCC, are no longer fighting on the people's corner. They are no longer fighting for reforms and free and fair elections. They've since given up on free, fair, and credible elections. They are now fighting for a share of the spoils of power. They will participate in these elections as long as they are confident that ZANU-PF will let the opposition win some seats. And ZANU-PF has got to let the opposition win some seats because ZANU-PF also needs legitimacy. And so they will have this trade-in where the opposition participates, they get a few gravy train seats, and those who participate in the presidential election, the losing candidates, as long as they endorse the ZANU-PF candidate as the winner, will get invited into this POLAD and get some benefits from that body, which is just got no legal basis at all. It's just meant to reward those who participate, to encourage them to participate in future, that's all. And so the people of Zimbabwe will continue to be shortchanged, because as long as we have this electoral process that allows ZANU-PF to rig the elections and stay in power, we will be stuck with this corrupt and incompetent ZANU-PF dictatorship. We will never have the benefit of good governance and accountable leaders. The solution is for the people of Zimbabwe themselves to wake up to the reality that we are caught in a situation where the opposition, whom we had put our trust to implement the democratic reforms necessary to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections, have since given up and are now participating in flawed elections for the sake of the few seats ZANU-PF gives away as benefits. These elections should not be going on. This is just a rat race. We already know who the winner is going to be. ZANU-PF will win with a landslide victory and the presidency. And the opposition, the leading ones like Triple C would win a number of the seats in parliament and in Senate. And those winning individuals will get the benefits of being on the gravy train. And Chamisa himself will benefit from the party having won X number of seats, and they'll get a certain percentage of the annual allocation from the Political Party Finance Act. And meanwhile, you will sit it out and wait for the opportunity to be the next government, because as long as he remains Zimbabwe's main opposition party, he is quite content with the few seats. The other presidential candidates will lose. They will join POLAD and get their benefits. And meanwhile, the ordinary Zimbabwean is the one who is stuck, because we'll be stuck with the ZANU-PF dictatorship, the corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical ZANU-PF dictatorship. Zimbabwe is a failed state. And the definition of a failed state is a state that is not able to provide even the most basic needs to its citizens. And that is exactly where we are. Unemployment has been 80% plus for the last 20 years in Zimbabwe. Most people, up to 49% now, are living in abject poverty. In the rural areas particularly, basic needs like education and healthcare have all but collapsed. Even in the urban centers, big hospitals like Parenyatwa, Pilo Hospital, they are struggling to provide even the most basic services. It is not uncommon to hear that Parenyatwa has no running water. They have no paracetamol. Basic things like that. If a big hospital like Parenyatwa doesn't have those basic needs, you can bet that the district hospitals in the rural backwaters are even worse off. Most of the professionals in the healthcare and education, most of them have left the country out of desperation to find jobs elsewhere just so that they could live. The country is in serious trouble. And these meaningless elections are only giving ZANU-PF the excuse to carry on. Another 5 years of this corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical ZANU-PF is unthinkable. And yet, that is the reality where we are now. Thanks to the opposition, who will keep on participating as long as ZANU-PF allows them to have a share of the spoils of power. This is the reality that we are facing. This argument has got to be made. And right now, there are people out there who think, well, it's too late now. Let's decide. Let's vote. Let's go and try to get change by voting. What ZANU-PF wants you to do is to participate. the result is already predetermined. But by participating, you give the process legitimacy. So ZANU-PF is not interested in holding free, fair, and credible elections. These elections are already done. They have got their own votes which they've secured by hook and by crook. And one of those ways is, for instance, the rural areas, they have paid all the headmen, the chiefs, ZANU-PF operatives, war veterans, and so forth, to frog march the rural voters to make sure that they vote for ZANU-PF. That has nothing to do with free, fair, and credible elections. But as long as these oppositions continue participating, it'll give credibility to the process. And so ZANU-PF will be able to get away with it. This is the vicious cycle we are caught up in. And unfortunately, most of the Zimbabwean electorate, we tend to think in this binary mentality. Is it right or wrong? Either ZANU-PF or opposition, Triple C. And once you've decided you support ZANU-PF, the mentality is everything that you do, everything that ZANU-PF does. You don't criticize it. And the same with opposition. And in this case, yes, since both ZANU-PF and the opposition are actually participating in these elections for mutual benefit, it means their supporters will respectively continue to participate in these elections, not knowing that participating is only giving the process legitimacy, for which the ordinary person is gaining absolutely nothing. The opposition supporters have been even brainwashed to the point where they believe Chamisa's claim that Chamisa can devise ways of winning rigged elections. In other words, let's allow ZANU-PF to continue rigging and we will try to win rigged elections, which is, of course, a nonsense. Why would you allow ZANU-PF to continue rigging the elections, particularly when they've been rigging for the last 43 years and they've never been able to come up with any of these winning in rigged elections strategies? None of them have worked. It's all hot air. But these people, once they believe in Triple C, they're locked in. They cannot think. They cannot ask the questions. Right now, Chamisa's campaign will be based on Triple C is going to win big. How are you going to win big when the election is so flawed that you could not even win in 2008 when Tsvangirai got 73% of the vote? Why do you keep on believing you can still win rigged elections? But those questions are never asked. And these people are busy mobilizing, trying to believe they can still win rigged elections. And by participating, of course, you give the process legitimacy, and the opposition leaders themselves benefit because a few of them will get the gravy train seats. But come the results on the 24th, for the first time, Chamisa will declare that the elections were rigged, as if he didn't know they were being rigged all along. But of course, the international community will not be paying attention because they have been saying it all along, and Chamisa and company have been ignoring them. But they will be only saying it to their constituency, to their supporters, who are gullible enough to believe it again without ever asking, what about those strategies that you were talking about? What really matters is that the damage then is done. He can complain only once, he cannot change the process. And a warning to some of the supporters, the hotheads, who think I will go on the street and protest and force ZANU-PF to give up power. Once you have given ZANU-PF legitimacy, to think you can force the regime out of office through street protests is naive, to say the least. You go on the street, you know what happened last time. The soldiers will be waiting for you with instructions to shoot to kill. There will be bloodshed if you go on the street. Those who pick that route are ill-advised. The best thing to do is to denounce this election process now. Even now, it's not too late. It is not too late to denounce this electoral process. And it is not too late to denounce CCC and all the rest of the opposition in the opposition camp. They all know that they're participating in these elections out of greed. They know the process is flawed. If you denounce them now, you'll be putting SADC under pressure to stop endorsing rigged elections. And if SADC was to deny ZANU-PF legitimacy, it will force the country back into the situation it was in 2008, where we had the GNU. This time, we will see to it that all the democratic reforms are implemented so that elections from there on are free, fair, and credible. This will put back Zimbabwe on the democratic path. Think about it. Thank you and good night.